Page 63, right there, kind of in the middle of the page, a busy day in Jesus' life. This should be number 6, and that's going to fit right in there. So you kind of have an idea of a little mistake I made, but just hold that, just put that in your book or something. We'll, when we get to it, make some points on that. Glad we can be together tonight. What is the latest on Dale?
He's in the hospital. Mary said he gave him some blood yesterday and maybe some today, maybe one chemo treatment.
Okay.
Like he's gonna be in there 28 days right now.
Wow.
Things go with it.
All of us understand Dale Hyman has been, he was successful battling prostate cancer, but it has leukemia. And Monday, it was Monday or yesterday? Monday, he was having some difficulty breathing and just felt terrible. His temperature was going up, and so they took him to the emergency room, and he was admitted. So we'll keep Dale in our prayers, and as well as others. I was telling some of you, a week from today, Lee has her consultation with the neurosurgeon, and we're really hoping that something can be done for her. She has her ongoing issues, but the back has just become extremely painful, and to get any relief, the medication, does what it does to a lot of people. It just makes you want to sleep and not feel too well. Tonight, being the first Wednesday of the month, we have our abbreviated class. So real briefly, we'll abbreviate. In our readings on our little schedule from the 26th, which was Sunday, Numbers 35 and 6, and then through today, which is number 60, that would be March 1, the first 7 chapters of Deuteronomy. So we want to do this fairly briefly, and we want to remember, Numbers is about what? The numbering of the people, organization of the people. Every person had to work, every work had a person to do it. And it ends, and then Deuteronomy begins. Duo means two, yes, second. And namas means law. So Deuteronomy means really second law. But it's not that God gave a second law. It's kind of an amendment to the law given in anticipation of their entrance into the land of Canaan. So that's what Deuteronomy is about. And we've noticed in times past that there are 3 basic divisions of Deuteronomy. The former part was what God had done, the history with a point in chapters 1 through 4, and then what God expects out of them. Chapter 5 is a repetition of the 10 Commandments. And then it takes really, it's like, the first commandment was thou shalt have no other gods before you. Second, don't make any graven image. And then chapter 6 is almost like it takes those first 2 commandments and really elaborates on those. But anyway, in Deuteronomy 1, we have the recounting of the departure from Horeb, the appointment of some of the helpers for Moses, sending out the spies. In chapter 2, the journey continues, and the crossing of Ar and the Arnon, and the conquest of Heshbon, Bashan, and then the possession of the tribes or the tribal lands on the eastern side of the river, the so-called Transjordanic tribes. In chapter 4, Israel is encouraged to continue in the law. Several passages there that are memorable. In verse 2 of chapter 4, ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. Is that one of those eternal principles? It really is. 2 John 9, whosoever goes onward abides not in the doctrine of Christ, what?
Hath not God.
Hath not God. It's the same here. Don't add to, don't take from, and don't substitute. And then there's another memorable passage in Deuteronomy 4. When he tells what God had done for them, and in verse 6 of chapter 4, keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, that shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people, for what great nation is there that hath a God so nigh unto them as Jehovah our God, in whensoever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that hath statutes and ordinances so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day? That's another eternal principle, I think, that when a person really carries out, he lives the new covenant, and a person sees that there is a transparency, an honesty, a goodness about him that, in what we just recently studied, Matthew 5:13 through 16, ye are the salt and the light. And it ends that little paragraph, even so that your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and
Glorify your Father in heaven.
That's right. Glorify your Father in heaven. So the one side effect or byproduct of our living a life devoted to God is to draw others just through our lives. And it was the same. I mean, you could look at Matthew 5:13 through 16 as a New Testament parallel to that passage right there. All right. Let's see. And then chapter 5 starts the second major section of Deuteronomy, which is what God had expected. And that continues through about chapter 21. What do you see, just glancing down? A repetition of what I mentioned a while ago. 10 Commandments. That's right, the 10 Commandments. And then in chapter 6, he exhorts them to continue on. The Lord our God is one. That's in verse 7, 8. 4, 5, and 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, all your might. That's just an Old Testament principle, right? We see that in the New Testament. And write these precepts on the children's hearts by talking about them when you lie down, when you rise up, when you're in the way. And then don't think that all you have is because of your own goodness. In verse 10 and 11, we've heard these passages all of our lives. When you go into a land which God promised the fathers, and you come into verse 11, houses of good things which you did not fill, and cisterns hewn out which you did not hew, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you'll be full, then beware lest you forget God. And that is a problem that most all of us have, our country has. We're so blessed in so many ways that people think sometimes it's because of their own goodness, and the Lord says that's not it, but it's because I've given these things to you. Don't tempt the Lord your God. Look at verse 16. Don't tempt the Lord your God. And verse 13. Fear the Lord, serve him, swear by thy name. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. And then verse 16, you shall not tempt the Lord. Where's that found in the New Testament? Twice. I mean, it's found once. Both of these verses are found. That's right. When Jesus was tempted, Matthew 4, Mark 1, Luke 4. All right, and then the last deals with the fact that when the young children would ask, Mom, Dad, what do these commandments mean? Then you're to tell them, well, we were servants, and it was our God who brought us out. Give the history behind as much as the children can understand. I think that's the idea. And then in chapter 7, the blessings of obedience. when, verse 1, when you come into the land and all this happens, then, look at verse 2, halfway down, then thou shalt utterly destroy them. Don't make marriages with don't let your daughters marry their sons or your sons marry their daughters, because why? Verse 4. They're drawn away. And then you are a holy people, verse 6. And he continues on with the blessings that would come their way when they are obedient. One last point I want to make in this review. Then this is a tremendous lesson for us. In verses 25 and 26, the graven images of their gods shall you burn with fire. Thou shalt not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, and take it unto thee, lest thou be snared therein, for it is an abomination to Jehovah thy God. Don't think, I'd like to have that gold. By the way, I could take that gold and melt it down and offer it in honor to the Lord, the Jehovah God. No, he said, thou shalt not bring an abomination into thy house and become a devoted thing. Thou shalt utterly detest it, utterly abhor it, for it's a devoted thing. Anything that was devoted to their idols, what were they to do? What was Israel to do? Destroy it completely. And that's a tremendous lesson for us insofar as how we ought to view any kind of sin, any practice of sin. You know, get away from it. Don't flirt with it. Don't play with it. Just put it away. And if somebody gave you a case of liquor, what you ought to do is sell it and give the money to the Lord, right? In light of this passage, what would you do? Destroy it. Yeah, reminds me of the African queen. Hepburn takes y'all remember that? Always his booze while he's drunk and pours it out in the river. That's what you do. There's a great example of people who did this in Acts 19 at Ephesus. The people who had been converted had brought their magical books. Y'all are thinking with me, what happened, Brother Gene?
They burned them.
They burned them, yes. And Luke even records how much they were worth. And they burned them. Didn't want any harm to be done to anybody else. All right. Lee and I used to say together, Deuteronomy is one of our favorite books. Of course, all of them are favorites, but in the sense that this is the last we hear of what main character? Moses. And Moses has been with them for 40 years. He's pleading with them now. He's in Exodus 3, God has to tell him, you're the one I want 3 for. He said, I'd rather you get somebody else. God says, you're the one. He was making all the excuses. Now it's almost like he's on the same page with God, and he's begging them to follow the Lord's commandments in all that they do.
And he is talking to a new generation.
But you're exactly right. How old is Moses at this point?
Almost 120.
About 120, because it's mentioned in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. All right, let's go to Luke, the 7th chapter. And Brother Richard or Sister Eleanor, y'all are good to Mark, and I know some of the rest of you are too. You do what I should do and don't. What's the last question we got to on our Sunday morning? Did we answer any of the questions on number 4, page 61? We did, didn't we?
Starting with D at the bottom of page 61.
Yeah, okay. So we got through. All right, let's put back up here. Go real briefly through the life of Jesus. We have the years of preparation, and then the beginning ministry begins with his baptism, and primarily in Judea. And then John has been in prison, so Jesus goes north and through Samaria, eventually comes to Cana, where he heals the nobleman's son in Capernaum. And then he goes to Nazareth, where he's rejected. Then he makes Capernaum his own city. A lot of miracles. He calls the 4 disciples, Peter, Andrew, John, James and John. Levi, whose occupation is a tax collector. His Hebrew name is Levi. His other name is Matthew, right? Okay, so we have all that going on. And then we have the Sermon on the Mount. And then we have these events that are recorded here in Luke 7. The centurion's servant is healed, and the centurion was what? Ethnically? A Gentile, right, a Roman soldier. And Jesus commended his faith. I've not seen so great faith, what? No, not in Israel. Then next, Jesus there's carried out of a city a young man on a that starts with a B, a B-I-E-R, beer, an open coffin, and Jesus does what to him? Yeah, he needed a lot of healing, didn't he? He raised him from the dead, and I shouldn't say. You know, Christian scientists believe that you're not really sick; you just think you're sick. And somebody said, you're sick. I'm sick. I said, no, you just think you are. And he got worse, and then finally somebody came to the daughter and said, well, how's your dad? He said, well, he thinks he's dead. Anyway, he raised him from the dead. Maybe I shouldn't have told y'all that, but and then after that we have the estimate of John. John sends a couple of disciples. Are you the one? Or look we for another? Jesus tells them, tell what I'm doing. And then he says, okay, evidently some people were thinking somewhat less of John. Of those who were born of women, there's not a greater than John, but he who is least in the kingdom is greater than he. And he compared that generation to little children in the marketplace who some are playing a flute, pipe, but their fellows are not doing what? They're not dancing. And some are wailing and crying, and they're not doing what with them? They're not mourning. And he said, that's just what, this generation is just like that. You can't please them. And for John came, neither eating nor drinking, they said, he's got a what? A demon. And the Son of Man came, not doing what John did, but eating and drinking. And they said, oh, he's a friend of tax collectors and sinners, a wine-bibber, a friend of, what was that? A glutton. But then he adds, and wisdom is justified of her children, of her works, of her children. Both are mentioned. And so then after that, he says, since nobody can please, he upbraids these cities wherein so many wonderful works are done. Woe unto thee, Chorazin, woe unto thee, Bethsaida. If the works done in thee were done in what two Old Testament cities? Tyre and Sidon. They would have remained to this day. And Capernaum, where I've been making headquarters, do you think you'll be exalted into heaven? I say you'll be cast down into Hades. For if the works done in thee were done in Sodom, what? It would have remained unto this day. Then after that, he, I'm looking at, that's in Matthew's account. And then after that is in Matthew, in verse 25, there were those who believed on him. And so he offered a prayer to the Father. I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou didst hide these things from the wise and understanding, the intelligentsia of their day, and did reveal them unto babes, for so it was well-pleasing in thy sight. And that's where we got down to C. And we talked about 1 Corinthians 1 and how the wisdom of God is set in array against the wisdom of men. And because the wisdom of men appeals to what part of us? Our pride. And that's the very thing that Paul made mention of in the last of 1 Corinthians 1, that God put to naught them that are strong and glorify the weak, that if any man glory, his glorying is in the Lord. And so it completely evaporates any kind of pride on the part of man. And that continues in 1 Corinthians 2. All right, so now let's look back at Matthew 11 real quickly. And let's just read these verses, 25 through 27. I preached on 28 through 30, so we just almost forget that. But 25 through 27. Kirsten, why don't you read that for us?
At that time, Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son. Anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal.
All right, several things there. The only thing, these not simpletons, that's not a good word for it, but these people who just accepted things on face value, they accepted Jesus. They're called here babes. Yea, Father, for so it was well-pleasing in thy sight. It's not that God had, Calvinists like to use that verse to show, see there, it was well-pleasing to God that some people be lost. Is that what he's saying? No, that's not what he's saying. He's simply saying that the nature of the gospel and the nature of what Jesus has been doing is such that people who are proud of their own accomplishments, proud of their own understanding, they're just not going to, Jesus is just not too big a deal for them. And that's exactly what the Lord understands, that you've got to humble yourself and understand, I need God. I'm a sinner. I need God's help so desperately before God can actually help a person. The first beatitude everybody in this room can quote. Blessed are the poor in spirit. That's what he's talking about here. Somebody who understands, I need God, rather than look how good I am. All right, so D. One other thing. In verse 27 that Kirsten read, all things, now again, contextually, he's talking about the very fact that, some of these people, the common people, understood, hey, this has got to be the Son of David. This has got to be the Christ. Nobody knew these things except God be with him. And others didn't. And they accepted what was being revealed to them through his person. So, in verse 27, all things have been delivered unto me of my Father, and no one knows the Son save the Father, neither doth any know the Father save the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son wills to reveal him. Just on first notice, nobody really knows God except, in a full sense, except one individual, Jesus Christ. Most of you have heard preaching a long, long time, and you've heard preachers or Bible class teachers use the word gnosko, which is the Greek word for know, to know. And it's an interesting word here. It has a prefix, epi, gnosko, which is probably not the right pronunciation, but the epi intensifies it. And so instead of just an idea of acquired knowledge, that epi means full understanding, complete, we would just say he's saturated with an understanding that they're both of the same nature. But what I was pointing out is, there's so many people who think, well, Jesus is a good guy, and they don't think about the idea that in a complete way, as complete as we could ever imagine, Jesus reveals who God is. Sometimes people say, you quote Matthew 19:9, divorce and remarriage, and somebody says, well, my God, have you heard that? My God, it cannot be, boxed in like that. My God is bigger than that. Well, Jesus Christ is revealing who? God. When Jesus speaks, he's revealing God's will, God's teaching. And so all of us know that, but just be aware when people come out with all kinds of crazy ideas. All right, D. All we can know about God comes from water. Whom? Jesus. To whom is this great invitation extended? All who labor and are heavy laden. How does Jesus being meek and lowly explain why verse 25 and 1 Corinthians 1:26 are true? Well, it goes back to what somebody mentioned a while ago. What's the chief problem of people when it comes to the gospel? Pride. It's pride. And that I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. In yoke, well, we talked about that one Sunday night. It's a device for coupling two similar animals together for the purpose of work. And sometimes it also means submission, subjugation. What does Jesus say is a part of taking his yoke? Learn of me. And what does he promise for those who will, that is, who will take his yoke? Rest. When I was teaching ninth grade, we were in these, I drew on the whiteboard what I was, remember Sunday night I had that yoke and had a couple cows, you know, I found that picture and I used it. But what I would do with young people, I kind of draw a yoke, you know, and then what is that, Gene, called that goes, the yoke has it's a harness that goes actually underneath the neck. The whole thing is called the yoke, but what's that thing that goes underneath the neck and comes back on the top side of the yoke?
In a horse, they call it a halter.
Halter, yeah. But anyway, I draw that, and then, you know, try to put a smiley face or something. You know, that's Jesus, and here's you over here. And then you could take a whole lot more than what I did Sunday night. You could take all of these qualities of Jesus' character and put them over here. And then when I'm yoked to Jesus, I've got to learn of him. For I am meek and lowly in heart, ye shall find rest unto your soul. If you come unto me, all you that labor, and learn of me. Is learning the nature in order that you can pull together. But you know, and I mentioned this Sunday night, but not in the notes, that the idea that never think that when you're trying to live a Christian life, that you're by yourself. The Lord's always with you. Paul made so many comments in Acts when he come to Corinth in Acts 18, and somewhat trepidation over what might happen, but the Lord was with me. So many times in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. And so the Lord, through arrangements that he has in the church for studies like this, teaching, preaching, worship itself, all of the things that he has said, all of these things are calculated to help us go to heaven. And so when a person encourages us or maybe reprimands us for something, then that's really the Lord working through individuals, helping us to pull on through with the load. You look like you want to say something. So it's that idea of yoke is just full of meaning, besides submission, as it's used primarily politically. All right, on the next page, 462, I had a note by Brother McGarvey. By the speech of Jesus, which constitutes the body of this section, Matthew proves that the Jews were both inconsistent and inexcusable when they rejected John and Jesus. Inconsistent because they condemned each for not living as the other did, and inexcusable because they disregarded evidence which would have convinced the wickedest cities in the world. There's also a dignity and grandeur in the authoritative sentence which Jesus pronounces on the impenitent cities, in his lofty assertion of divine power and knowledge, his benevolent invitation for all who are weary and heavy laden to come to him, which are in perfect keeping with his claim to be the Son of God. These sentiments impress the soul as being truthful and pertinent utterances from a being full of divine power and goodness, whereas any created being, they would appear the extreme of arrogance and pretentiousness. They could not have originated in a false and deceitful spirit, such as the Spirit of Jesus must have been if he was not the Son of God. I highlighted in my own book here, it is internal evidence such as this that enables the Bible to furnish in itself the proof that it came from God. I was talking to a young man not too long ago, and I told him, we can talk about a lot of evidences for the existence of God that are external, cause effect. For every effect, there's got to be an adequate cause. The idea of organization, the order of the world, the thing, how's it keep? We can talk about all those things, and they're helpful. But I told him, there are internal evidences in the Scripture to show that these statements made by the Lord himself and others, that there is absolutely no way that would have come by a human hand. It couldn't have been fabricated by a group of men. It's too fantastic. And what McGarvey said there, I have thought for some time, the internal evidences enables the Bible to furnish in itself the proof that it came from God. If the Bible, Moses' works, 1500 BC, the continuous theme, absolutely no disharmony to the whole, all of that proves that the divine writer behind it has to be. In other words, if the Bible is what it claims to be, if it's inspired, God is. If the Bible is inspired, Jesus Christ was a historical person. So instead of saying, starting, had to have our cause, effect, and all that, let's just look at the Bible. And if the Bible is trustworthy, it's verifiable, all of it makes sense, and there's no way certain things could have been said except there be a divine hand behind it, then it proves God. It proves Jesus as the Son of God. And it's just a little different way of looking at evidences, I think. You look like you wanted to say something, Sister Martha. Anybody?
I was thinking about those that were meek and lowly. They were the ones that wanted more. They knew that,
Yes.
for me to get more, it's got to be God's way, not my way.
Yeah.
And those that were in authority, the Pharisees said, we want God, but we want him like we want him.
Yes.
Not like he wants us to be.
Exactly. And they wanted a Messiah who would, get them out from, dost thou at this time restore the kingdom to Israel. Acts 1 verse 7. So, you're right. They wanted a political deliverer and a physical savior. And that's not what Jesus did. The saving that Jesus did, that is the resurrections from the dead, the restoration of sight and all the diseases, all of those things prove physically, and that's on your sheet, that he had the power to do spiritually. Exactly, Farron. He had the power to do spiritually and eternally what he could do physically and temporally, because no human could do that even in a physical way. Anything else? Sister Sandra? All right, let's stop. It's 25 till, so give plenty of time to the speaker. Glad to be with you and enjoy the life of Christ.